1998 action flick Armageddon, an asteroid the size of Texas is nudged into a collision course with Earth by a comet, and NASA only notices it 18 days before impact. The agency recruits a veteran oil driller played by Bruce Willis to fly out to the asteroid and drill a big hole in it and to detonate a nuke in that hole, which should destroy the asteroid before it hits Earth, which undetonated, that rock not broken up ahead of time, would wipe out everything on the planet. It's a fun, late 90s flick, loaded with some of the biggest names of the era. I will not ruin it for you if you haven't seen it, but the crux of the plot is that there's a lot going on in space, and at some point, there is a chance one of these big rocks hurling around in the void will line up just right with Earth's orbit, and that rock, because of how fast things move in space, would hit with enough force to wipe out a whole lot of living things, and perhaps even all living things. This film's concept was predicated on historical events, not the oil men placing a nuke on a rogue asteroid, but the idea of an asteroid hitting Earth and killing off pretty much everything. One theory as to how we got our moon in the first place is that an object the size of Mars called Theia collided with Earth around 4.5 billion years ago. That collision, according to some versions of the so-called giant impact hypothesis anyway, could have brought Earth much of its water, as the constituent materials required for both water and carbon-based life were seemingly most prevalent in the outer solar system back in those days. So this object would have slammed into early Earth, creating a disk of debris that combined the early Earth's materials with those of the outer solar system, and that disk would have then reformed over time into a large body, Earth, and a smaller body, the Moon. In far more recent history, though still unthinkably ancient by the measures of a human lifespan, an asteroid thought to be somewhere between 6 and 9 miles, which is about 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter, hit off the coast of what is today Mexico, along the Yucatan Peninsula, killing about 70 to 75% of all species on Earth. This is called the Chicxulub event, and it's believed to be what killed the dinosaurs and all their peer species during that period, making way for, among other things, early mammals, and thus eventually humans. So that was an asteroid that, on the low end, was about as wide as Los Angeles. You can see why those in charge back in the mythical 90s of that movie tapped Bruce Willis to help them handle an asteroid the size of Texas. Thankfully, most asteroid impacts are not as substantial, though they can still cause a lot of damage. What's important to remember is that because these things are moving so fast, even though part of their material will be burnt up in the atmosphere, and even though they might not all be Texas-sized, they generate an absolutely boggling amount of energy upon impact. The exact amount of energy will vary based on all sorts of things, including the composition of the asteroid, the angle at which it hits, and where it hits. An oceanic impact will result in a whole lot of that energy just vaporizing water, for instance, while a land impact, which is less common because a little more than 70% of the planet is water, will result in more seismic consequences. That said, an asteroid that's about 100 meters in diameter, so just 328 feet, which is a lot smaller than the aforementioned 6 to 9 mile asteroid, a 100-meter, 328-foot object hitting Earth can result in a force equivalent to tens of megatons of TNT, each megaton equaling 1,000,000 tons. And for comparison, the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II ranged from 15,000 to 21,000 tons of TNT, mere kilotons. So a 100-meter, 328-foot asteroid hitting Earth could generate somewhere between a few 100,000 and a few million atomic bombs worth of energy, none of which would be particularly devastating on a planetary scale, in the sense that the ground beneath our feet would barely register even that big an impact. But the thin layer of habitable surface where most or all of the world's life exists certainly would register that kind of impact. And that's the other issue here, is that on top of even a relatively small asteroid being a city killer, wiping out everyone and everything in a large area around where it strikes, it can also cause longer-term devastation by hurling a bunch of water and soil and dust and ash and other detritus into the atmosphere, acting as a cloak around the planet, messing with agriculture, messing with growth patterns and other cycles for plants and animals, the water and heat cycles would be completely thrown off, all of which can cause other knock-on effects like more severe storms in unusual places, periods of famine, and even conflict over scarcer resources. What I'd like to talk about today is a recently discovered asteroid that is being called a potential city killer, and which is raising alarms in the planetary defense world because of its relatively high likelihood of hitting Earth in 2032. You're listening to Let's Know Things. I'm Colin Wright. I'm able to keep this show ad-free because of support from listeners like you. If you're finding value in what I'm doing here, consider becoming a paid supporter for the cost of a cup of coffee each month at letsknowthings.com. And as a thank you for your helping me keep this show solvent, you'll receive an additional bonus More Things episode each month. All right, let's get back to the show. Asteroid 2024 YR4 is thought to be around 130 to 300 feet, which is about 40 to 90 meters in diameter, and it has what's called an Earth crossing or Apollo-type orbit. Asteroids with this type of orbit will not necessarily ever intersect with Earth, and some are incredibly unlikely to ever do so, but relatively few of them, that we're aware of anyway, have orbits that periodically get really close to Earth's orbit, to the point that even a small tweak to that orbit, caused by gravitational perturbances or maybe being nudged by space dust or something else in space, could put them on course to cause a lot of damage. Global astronomical bodies keep tabs on these sorts of asteroids, and they keep an especially close eye on what are called PHAs, or potentially hazardous asteroids, because they are objects that are close-ish to Earth, are in orbits that could bring them even closer, perhaps even on an intersection path with Earth at some point, and they have an absolute magnitude of 22 or brighter, which means they are big enough to be fairly visible to our instruments, and that generally means they'll be 500 feet or around 140 meters in diameter or larger, though not necessarily always, which puts them in the will cause severe damage if it hits Earth category either way. That latter component of the definition is important, as while the Chelyabinsk meteor that blew up in what's called an airburst over southwestern Russia in 2013 caused a lot of damage, generating about 400 to 500 kilotons of TNT worth of energy, about 30 times the energy released by the atomic bomb that blew up Hiroshima, which in turn resulted in a shockwave that injured nearly 1,500 people sufficiently that they had to seek medical attention, alongside all the broken glass and thousands of damaged buildings caused by that shockwave, which in turn caused those injuries. That meteor is considered to be pretty tame compared to what we would expect from a larger impact. It was only about 60 feet, which is around 18 meters in diameter. That's part of why asteroid 2024 YR4 is getting so much attention. It's more than twice and maybe as much as 5 times that large, and current orbital models suggest that on December 22nd, 2032, it has a small chance of hitting Earth. Now, small is a relative term here, both in the sense that the exact likelihood figure keeps changing, and will continue to do so as we're able to capture more data leading up to that near-future deadline, and in the sense that even very small possibilities that a city-killing asteroid will hit Earth is something that we should arguably be worried about out of proportion to the smallness of the raw statistical likelihood. If you are told there's a 1% chance that you'll die today, that means there's a 99% chance you won't. But that 1% chance is still really substantial in the context of living or not living. Similarly, a 1% chance of a large asteroid impacting Earth is considered to be substantial because that means a 1% chance that a city could be completely wiped out, along with all the maybe millions of people living in it, all the plants and animals in the region too, and we could see all those aforementioned weather effects and atmospheric issues and so on for a long time into the future. Now at the moment, as of the day I'm recording this, there is a 2.2% chance this asteroid will hit Earth on that day, December 22nd, 2032. Its likely impact zone, if Earth were to be hit, stretches roughly along the equator from just south of Mexico across upper South America and the middle of Africa over to eastern India. If it's on the larger side of current estimates, it's possible that its blast could stretch for 31 miles in all directions from where it hits, because it's a hard object the size of a large building, traveling at around 38,000 miles per hour. So just shy of 7 years, 11 months from now, which is around 2,870 days, that thing could plow into a span of Earth that contains quite a few major cities. But it could also hit a stretch of ocean, causing a separate set of problems, ranging from tsunamis to borked weather patterns and loads of sun-concealing, globe-spanning cloud cover. Again, though, the numbers here are weird because of the nature of the things they're describing. Nearly 8 years is a long time in many ways, but if you're staring down the barrel of a potentially city-killing asteroid, that begins to feel like not long at all. Bruce Willis only had 18 days, but he also lived in the world of Hollywood fantasy. In real life, spinning up that kind of mission takes a lot longer, and that's after you settle on who's going to pay for some kind of asteroid killing or deflecting program, how it's going to work, and so on. Fortunately, for everyone involved, back in late 2022, NASA launched a project called the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART, which entailed launching a spacecraft that rendezvoused with a pair of asteroids with a known trajectory. That spacecraft shot an impactor, basically a probe that acts as a little space bullet, at one of the asteroids, which allowed the craft, along with a supplementary satellite, to collect all sorts of data about what happened to the target asteroid after it was hit. The hope was that using this method, launching a craft that shoots space bullets at asteroids, we would be able to reduce the target asteroid's orbit by 73 seconds, which is a measure of orbital measurement. Instead, it shortened it by 32 minutes, which is way more, and generally considered to be a huge success, beyond what the mission planners could have hoped for. Not all of what was learned from the DART mission will be transferable to other possible missions, because asteroids have different compositions, have different spins and speeds, and some will be easier to hit than others, and to hit in a way that would move them beneficially. We want to move them away from a path that lines up with Earth's orbit, not in such a way that a strike with Earth becomes more likely. But this success suggests that it may be possible to basically nudge asteroids away from a collision trajectory with our planet, rather than having to blow the things up with nukes, which would be a far more involved and dangerous undertaking. We've also seen the costs associated with space launches drop dramatically over the past 10 years, to the point where launching this sort of mission would cost a fraction of what it would have cost back in the 90s. Which is fortunate, as historically, governments have shown less enthusiasm for firing space bullets than for firing bullets planet-side. So if worse comes to worse, there's a chance that even a beneficent billionaire, or maybe even a millionaire, could fund such a project in a pinch. At the moment, it is still overwhelmingly likely that asteroid 2024 YR4 will miss Earth in 2032. A 2.2% chance of an impact is worrying, and we'll hopefully start building the infrastructure we need to deflect such objects sooner rather than later, as even if we don't end up using said craft this time around, it does seem prudent to have these sorts of missions ready to go at a moment's notice, should we someday find ourselves in an Armageddon situation with only a few weeks before something really bad happens. That said, even with today's quite high likelihood, that still means there's a 97.8% chance it won't be anything to worry about. And that will continue to change as we learn more, hopefully downward, but possibly upward as well. Either way, it is still overwhelmingly likely, even if we do nothing, that this asteroid will not hit us. We should know a fair bit more by April of this year, after which point the asteroid will be fairly far away and thus trickier to see until 2028, when it loops back around in our direction. There would still be time to do something about it then if warranted, but more time is typically better with this sort of thing, again because we want to be sure any deflection attempt is successfully launched, but also that it deflects away from us, not toward us. And our best bet to deflect correctly would be during that 2028 close flyby. So it's likely by April, or just after that, we will have some kind of decision by the folks in charge of the world about whether to launch a deflection mission in 2028 or thereabouts. All of which would be historic, but would also probably be a good idea and a worthwhile investment, wherever this specific asteroid's path ends up taking it, as our space neighborhood is rich with these sorts of rocks and other astronomical bodies, and because as our in-space sensory assets have become more numerous and sophisticated, we've been able to see just how lucky we've been to have not had more horrible impacts so far. There's just a lot of stuff flying around out there, and the moon probably helps quite a bit by taking some of those bullets for us. But even with that extra layer of natural protection, we might want to play a more active role in managing our orbital neighborhood soon, as it would be really embarrassing to have all this knowledge and these capabilities, but to not be able to use them when we need to, because we failed to plan ahead. The book I'd like to recommend today is called Exadelic by John Evans. This is a very unusual science fiction novel, and it goes in a lot of interesting and bizarre directions. Took a lot of twists and turns that I wasn't expecting, and rather than trying to sum up the collection of things that this novel does, I am going to read you the copy that was shared for it by the publisher on Goodreads. And that reads, quote, "When an unconventional offshoot of the US military trains an artificial intelligence in the dark arts that humanity calls black magic, it learns how to hack the fabric of reality itself. It can teleport matter, it can confer immunity to bullets, and it decides that obscure Silicon Valley middle manager Adrian Ross is the primary threat to its existence. Soon Adrian is on the run, wanted by every authority, with no idea how or why he could be a threat. His predicament seems hopeless, his future non-existent. But when he investigates the AI and its creators, he discovers his problems are even stranger than they seem, and unearths revelations that will propel him on a journey and a love story across worlds, eras, and everything, everywhere, all at once." End quote. Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider picking up a copy of Exadelic by John Evans. Let's Know Things is a listener-supported show. I don't make any money from ads, only what listeners contribute by becoming paid supporters at letsknowthings.com. If you're not in the position to become a paid supporter at the moment, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your pods. Those help get the show in front of more people and lend a hint of credibility to independently made shows like this one. A huge thanks in advance, whatever shape your support might take.